The Cold War, prostrate between two superpowers. The United States, the USSR, and Great Britain formed an alliance to win World War II. That alliance rested on the personal relationship between Stalin, Roosevelt, and Churchill. Before the war, the Western powers were suspicious of the Soviet Union. It did not gain recognition from the United States, Great Britain, or France because of its communist activities. Instead, the United States, Great Britain, and France looked at fascist Germany and fascist Italy as possible allies, or at least a bulwark against communism. Communists before the war were the threat. The irony then is, during the war, it was the communists who helped the West drive back the fascists and take control of Western Europe. The Soviet Union had the most deaths on the Eastern Front, while British and American forces came up through Italy and finally through France. And so both together were able to defeat the threat of Nazism. That personal relationship, however, broke down after the war. Only Stalin was left standing. Roosevelt died, and Churchill lost an election. That meant that Harry Truman replaced Franklin Roosevelt, and Clement Attlee replaced Churchill. Stalin was already distrustful of the United States and Great Britain, and then when these personnel changes happened in the West, he had no guarantees that the promises made to him during the war would be kept after the war. The war itself brought some fundamental changes to the balance of power in Europe. Since the 1500, European countries had launched eras of colonization. The first period of colonization focused on North America and South America and Central America. The second era of colonization, called the era of New Imperialism, focused on Africa and Asia. Over this 400-year period, Europeans were able to go out and exploit the resources of the world. At the end of World War II, European powers found themselves at a loss in the world. Western Europe lost its preeminence in standing. Western Europe found itself between two superpowers, the United States and the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. A superpower is a country that has the ability to defeat all the other countries in the world combined except the other superpower. At the end of World War II, the United States and the Soviet Union were superpowers. No country could hope to stand up to their military might, which meant that the United States and the Soviet Union had the best position. This was fundamentally different than 1900. In 1900, Great Britain, France, and Germany were the dominant powers in the world. The United States and the Soviet Union were just on the rise. Just 30 short years later, though, the United States and the Soviet Union found themselves at the pinnacle of their success. That success, that might, rested on atomic weapons. Atomic weapons produced the policy of MAD, mutually assured destruction. Neither superpower wanted to attack the other out of fear of mutually assured destruction. Each side invested in conventional weapons as well as ever-advancing nuclear technology. That nuclear technology meant that they had the ability not only to destroy the other superpower, but the entire world with it. This created a deterrence. Neither the United States nor the Soviet Union wanted to directly confront each other on the battlefield. The fear is that this would be MAD, mutually assured destruction. The result then was a Cold War, an antagonistic relationship between the United States and the Soviet Union. The world divided itself between these two superpowers, either backing the United States or backing the Soviet Union. Both the United States and the Soviet Union used proxies to antagonize the other side. The goal was not to destroy each other in a single blow. Rather, the goal was to slowly erode support and the foundation under their adversary. And so they used propaganda, they used lies, they used the media, they used proxy wars, anything except a direct confrontation. It was a Cold War. They feared that a hot war would get very hot indeed. It would light the whole world on fire. And as Mikhail Gorbachev later said in the 1980s, there was no Planet B. There was not going to be another Noah's Ark. If the United States and the Soviet Union succeeded in going to war, that would mean the end of humanity as we knew it. That changed the balance of power in Europe. The Europeans, the Western Europeans in particular, found themselves prostrate between two superpowers. They were laying down and had very little ability to lift themselves up. They didn't have the population, they didn't have the industrial strength, they didn't have the financing. World War II had simply drained them of their strength, and the technological changes after the war meant that the United States and the Soviet Union had the ability to dominate world politics for the next 50 years. This lecture will focus on 4 elements: the destruction caused by the war, the post-war settlement amongst the Allies at the end of the war, how that played out in Germany, and finally how it played out in Hungary. And we see in each of these cases, the destruction left Europe prostrate between two superpowers. The European leaders had very little say in the direction of post-war Europe. The post-war settlement was driven by the needs of the United States and the Soviet Union. This produced a Cold War. And so Germany was divided in half. Hungary, inside the Soviet sphere, fell to Soviet influence and Soviet control. This was the general pattern throughout the next 40 years. Western Europe became part of the American sphere of influence. Eastern Europe became part of the Soviet sphere of influence. Neither side had much say, and when they tried to deviate from that, events pulled them back into the orbit of either Washington or Moscow.